My name is Sophie, 33 years old, and I'm the head nurse in the emergency department of a major hospital in Oregon. But in my family's eyes, I'm just the frugal little sister, nothing to be proud of. That evening, during my parents' 45th wedding anniversary party, while I was serving a steaming bowl of soup like an unnamed maid, my sister Savannah stood in the middle of the lavish living room, raised her glass of champagne, and said loudly, "Too bad Sophie couldn't contribute anything tonight, since she's apparently going bankrupt." The room erupted in laughter, pitying looks, whispers. I stood still. But what they didn't know was that I had just placed a deposit on the very vacation home Savannah was about to brag about in front of the entire extended family. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family in front of a crowd? Leave a comment if you've ever been looked down on, no matter how hard you've tried. Tap like if you believe silence can be a kind of strength. And don't forget to follow the channel, because what I'm about to share is how I quietly changed the game. I walked through the large glass doors of the villa Savannah had rented, decorated with white flowers, scented candles, and blown-up wedding portraits of my parents. The servers, dressed in cream uniforms, walked past me without so much as a glance. On the long table in the living room sat expensive wines, imported cheeses, and gold-stitched napkins. Savannah wanted everything to be classic New England style, even though we were smack in the middle of dry, scorching Arizona. As I placed the soup bowl on the table, her voice rang out behind me like a knife. "Oh, Sophie, no need to do that. We've got servers, remember? Unless you're just keeping up with your side hustle?" Laughter exploded from the cluster of relatives behind the sofa. Aunt Martha laughed so hard her wine spilled on her dress, and Uncle Henry raised an eyebrow at me like he was watching a sitcom. I swallowed and nodded. "Don't worry, I'm just helping Mom with the last course." "Oh, right," Savannah turned to the others. "Sophie works at a hospital, but not as a doctor. She's a nurse. Night shifts. Probably used to carrying trays around." Another wave of laughter. I heard my mom whisper, "Savannah, that's enough." But she never could stop her. Savannah was always the one in the center of every photo, always the child they believed would do something big. And me? I was the quiet one in the background, the one whose birthday they forgot, the one they didn't ask about but remembered when they needed someone to house sit during vacations. I sat by the window, sipping plain water from a wine glass no one had touched. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Congratulations, Sophie. Your application is approved. You're now the new owner of 24 Maple Shore Drive. Documents will arrive this week." I read the new message 3 times. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed cold. I glanced around the room, glittering lights, soft music, Savannah beaming beside her husband, Brian, in a designer dress worth half my monthly salary. I remembered her Instagram post posing in front of that Oregon vacation home, calling it a dream coming true. That dream now had my name on it. I smiled faintly, set my phone down, and tapped my fingers to the rhythm of the music like nothing had changed. But inside, the layers of old pain were shedding, making room for something else. Something steadier, something sharper. Savannah was still giving her speech. "And we're just so lucky to have a family that shares all the good things in life. Not everyone gets that, right?" She looked directly at me. "Even if someone in the family can't really contribute, well, everyone has a role." I caught Brian's eye. He pressed his lips together and looked away. My dad busied himself straightening the tablecloth like he hadn't heard a thing. My mom stared at the floor, hands clenched tightly in her lap. No one said a word to defend me. They were used to Savannah shining. And they were used to me fading. A soft voice came from behind me. Emma, my cousin, leaned in and whispered, "You okay?" I turned to her and smiled. "I'm fine, thank you." someone still saw me, and I'd let them see clearly. As everyone moved outside to take group photos, I lingered in the living room beside a tall bookshelf where my parents' old wedding photo hung. I remembered the day I bought my first apartment. No one came to see it, no one called to ask. It was just me, standing alone in that tiny kitchen, flipping on the light switch and whispering, "Welcome home." I never had many dazzling moments like Savannah, but I had grit. And I'd worked nearly nonstop for 7 years to get here. Every night shift, every 12-hour trauma case became another silent brick in the house I would one day call my own. Savannah stepped into the room, holding a bubbling glass of champagne. "Sophie, aren't you coming out? Mom and Dad are waiting." I looked at her glass, then at myself. "You go ahead, I'll be out in a bit." She shrugged and strutted away like a queen. I stayed there, hand resting on the photo frame. My eyes landed on my father's smiling face. I whispered, "Dad, I never needed anyone to stand up for me. But today, I'm going to stand up for myself." I picked up my phone and sent a text to my lawyer. "Don't release the owner's name until I say so. I have a plan." Outside, Savannah's voice echoed, "Mom, Dad, come on, picture time. Brian, fix my dress." I let out a long breath. Not from exhaustion, but because finally, I didn't have to stay silent anymore. No arguments, no comebacks, just one moment, and it was coming. I placed my hand over my chest. My heartbeat was steady, calm, cold, but deep beneath it burned a fire no one could. See, the same fire that kept me alive through the endless nights in the ER, through every family dinner where I played the invisible waitress. That fire was waiting for its moment, and I would be the one to strike the match. I still remember that overcast autumn day when I was 12, the first time I realized that silence in my family wasn't peace. It was a crack we had learned to ignore. That day, Savannah shattered a glass in the living room because Mom wouldn't sign a permission slip for her to travel to Europe with her boyfriend. The sound rang through the house, but the silence afterward was worse. Mom didn't cry. Dad didn't speak. I was the only one who picked up the shards. "She didn't mean it," Savannah mumbled, then stormed upstairs. But we all knew if I hadn't bent down to clean, no one would have made her. From then on, I learned to walk quietly, to listen before speaking, to patch things up when Savannah blew everything apart. I was the youngest, but I always felt like the one trying to keep the family balanced. When I was 15, my mom was diagnosed with a breast tumor. She was scared and overwhelmed, and I saw her cry during dinner. Dad held her hand, but he didn't know what to say. Savannah was away at college, calling home every few days, but never once asking about the surgery. When the radiation started, I took a year off from school. I woke up every morning at 5 to make porridge, straighten the bed, and log all her medications by the doctor's instructions. I learned how to change bandages, how to mix saline in the right ratio, how to detect post-treatment fever. Savannah came home only twice during the entire 8 months of Mom's treatment. Once, to take a photo by her hospital bed and post it on Instagram with the caption, "Family is everything." The other time, she showed up for Mom's birthday, bringing a cake with the logo of the most famous bakery in town. That day, Mom was overjoyed. I, on the other hand, was in the kitchen washing dishes alone, listening to Savannah laugh in the living room, talking about a networking event she'd just attended in Los Angeles. By the time I returned to school, all my classmates had already submitted their college applications. I applied late, choosing nursing not because I had no options, but because I felt at peace knowing I could care for others. When I got the acceptance letter to the nursing program at the University of Arizona, Dad nodded. "That's fine. You picked a stable career," Savannah smirked. "Nursing? Why not try becoming a doctor or didn't have the scores for it? I didn't respond. I was used to it. Savannah never hid the disdain in her voice. She didn't scream like she used to when we were kids. Now, she used words light enough to make people laugh, just sharp enough to sting without sounding cruel. When I was 23, Mom relapsed. This time it was worse. She had to stay in the hospital long term and couldn't walk. Savannah wasn't around. I worked morning shifts at the hospital, then rushed to the other hospital every evening to care for Mom. I still remember that call from Savannah, her voice tired. Sophie, I'm swamped. Can you take care of Mom for me? You're used to it anyway. Used to it. That phrase became the unspoken reason why the entire family assigned the caregiver role to me. Meanwhile, Savannah lived her successful life, attending meetings, closing deals, hosting her lavish wedding with Brian at a private beach resort. I wasn't asked to be a bridesmaid. So you won't feel pressured, Savannah said. You're not into glitz and glamour, right? I just smiled then. But that night, I went home, pulled the wedding invitation off the fridge, and tossed it into the trash. After her wedding, I started picking up night shifts. Not because I needed money right away, but because I knew if I wanted options later, I had to start preparing now. I lived in an old apartment on the south side of the city. Most of my neighbors were either elderly or fresh college grads. Savannah came by once and shook her head. This neighborhood's kind of sketchy, sis. But just 3 years later, the area became one of the fastest growing real estate markets in the state. I didn't tell anyone, I quietly invested. Not much, but steadily. Every bonus from the hospital went straight into a long-term investment account. I met with online financial advisors, learned to read reports, and studied the market. Savannah used to say, if you want to get rich, you have to take risks. I just thought, if you want peace, you have to be patient. No one in the family ever asked how I was living. At family gatherings, they still looked at me like the little sister who hadn't made it yet. When are you finally going to buy your own place? Must be tough saving much on a nurse's salary, huh? Maybe Savannah could help you get a small place in the suburbs? I always smiled. No one knew I had paid off my first apartment by age 29. No one knew my investment account had already crossed 6 figures. No one knew I was preparing to buy one of the most expensive villas in a resort community in Oregon, the same villa Savannah once stood in front of, taking photos and captioning them. The dream's getting closer. But that was about to change. I wasn't seeking revenge. I didn't want anyone to suffer. I just wanted one simple thing, to be seen for who I really was. And sometimes, the only way to achieve that is to become the very thing they never believed you could be. Every time I sat down at a family dinner, it felt like stepping onto a stage where I had no lines. Everyone else had roles, spotlight, applause. Me, if I was lucky, I got to be part of the background. That Christmas dinner, while everyone carved roast and poured wine, Dad turned to Savannah with pride in his eyes. Heard you. Just closed on 2 more houses in that new development, right? She smiled and nodded slightly, as if there was no need to boast everyone already knew. Just some returning clients, Dad. They wanted to invest more. Mom quickly grabbed her phone and scrolled to a picture Savannah had posted on Facebook 2 days earlier, her standing in a newly redecorated living room, sunlight filtering through the curtains like a magazine spread. Look at Savannah's living room, everyone. It's like something out of a movie. I sat beside her, picking at my salad, thinking about the research manuscript that had just been approved for publication in a national medical journal. It was a project I led on rapid response protocols in emergency care, cutting down critical treatment times for high-risk patients. But I didn't say a word. No one asked. No one remembered what I did beyond night shift nurse. Brian, Savannah's husband, turned to me, trying to be friendly. Heard Sophie had something published recently? I looked up, a bit surprised. Oh, just a small piece in an internal column. Nothing major. Still made it to print? That's impressive. Savannah smiled, but there was something in it like a thin coat of paint already starting to peel. I thought those were for doctors. They publish nurse research too? The whole table went quiet for a moment. Brian took a sip of wine to avoid eye contact. I just smiled lightly and didn't reply, because I understood it wasn't the first time she downplayed my achievements. When I was promoted to lead the night shift rapid response team, Savannah had said to the whole family, "Wow, that sounds fancy. But night shift's not as intense as day shift, right?" Mom nodded. "Yeah, but still sounds tough. Night shifts aren't good for your health, honey." No one asked how I felt. No one said I had worked hard enough to beat out several other strong candidates. No one knew the promotion came after countless nights next to patients struggling to breathe, after triaging critical emergencies where I had to choose between saving a life and comforting a grieving family. I was used to it, used to my family sharing Savannah's new kitchen photos, but never posting a picture of me receiving a national award with my colleagues. Used to Mom telling the neighbors about Savannah's Italian imported sofa, but never mentioning that I once handled a rare cardiac arrest in under 4 minutes. Every comment, every look felt like a well-placed slap, not hard enough to bruise, but sharp enough to disorient you if you weren't already standing tall from within. I held no resentment, but sometimes I wondered, do I need to redecorate a living room or pose in front of a beach to be considered valuable? One evening, I dropped by my parents' house after a shift. Mom was in the living room, putting together a photo album from an online print service. She was talking on the phone while flipping through pictures. "Yeah, I'll send you some of Savannah's photos. The new bedroom she painted in that soft cream shade, it looks so elegant." She looked up when I walked in. "Sophie, did you eat yet? There's some soup on the stove." I opened the fridge to grab some water, about to head upstairs, when Mom called out again. "Hey, didn't you have something published recently?" I froze. "Yes, the Journal of Internal Medicine." "Right, I heard Brian mention it. Was it something about cardiology?" "No, it was about rapid response protocols in respiratory emergencies." Mom nodded like she'd just fulfilled her duty to ask. "That's good, but your job really takes a lot of time. Aren't you worried about marriage?" I didn't answer. To Mom, marriage was still the highest achievement a woman could reach. Savannah got married young, had a lavish wedding, even made it onto a local magazine. And me? In my 30s, still no one to bring home, still working night shifts, so I was just the one who hadn't settled down. I remember the day Savannah changed the living room curtains, just one set of curtains, and Mom took pictures from 4 different angles, uploaded an entire album with detailed fabric descriptions and where she bought them. When I received news, I was appointed department coordinator, which meant managing over 30 staff members and overseeing the emergency triage flow. Mom just said, "Taking on more work must be exhausting, huh?" I didn't expect anything anymore. But what hurt me the most wasn't their silence, it was the fact that I had let that silence convince me I had nothing to be proud of. Then one day, I decided to stop being silent inside. I didn't need them to applaud me. But I wasn't going to let them look down on me again, not for my job, not for where I came from, and definitely not for the quiet life I had chosen. The next dinner was a celebration for Savannah's promotion. She had bought a new house near the golf course, threw a wine party, and invited the whole extended family. And me, I brought a signed purchase agreement. A coastal vacation villa, the very one Savannah once called her dream at 35. I didn't speak up at the table. I didn't argue. I just smiled and gently placed my hand over the envelope in my purse. There was no need to shout to prove my worth. Just quietly do the things they never imagined you could. I started listening to finance podcasts every morning as I drove home from my night shifts. Just as the sun began rising behind the hospital buildings, while others were starting their day, I was completely drained. But I didn't go straight to sleep. I sat in my car, eyes closed, listening to calm voices, analyzing markets, explaining passive income, early stage real estate, and opportunities in overlooked zones. I didn't know much about investing, but I understood the power of quiet persistence. Every time Savannah hurt me, every time Mom leaned over to praise how Savannah had vision, I picked up another night shift. Not to forget, but to build. I didn't have time to sulk. I had bills, I had goals, and I had a kind of endurance no one in my family thought I had. My first apartment was on the west side of the city, a place people used to call the gray zone. Savannah once heard I planned to move there and wrinkled her nose. Are you serious? People leave trash on their balconies there. I once saw police tape down the block. I didn't argue. I had spent 6 months tracking that neighborhood. The number of vacant units was dropping. The light rail system was about to open. And a small university had just signed a long-term lease for a building across the street. I bought that apartment for just over $100,000. I lived there for 3 years, renovated it little by little, then rented it out for double my monthly mortgage. When the market heated up, the area was renamed after a rising arts district, and the value of my unit tripled. Still, I told no one. I was still just that frugal girl, Sophie, still driving an old car, still wearing a coat from last winter's clearance sale, still eating eggs and rice during late-night shifts. No one looked at the loan I had paid off. No one asked why I never missed rent. They only saw me walking to the bus stop and thought, poor thing, still not stable. Meanwhile, Savannah constantly changed cars, changed homes, changed curtains, even swapped out the chandelier in her dining room because the light was too yellow. Her Facebook was full of curated snapshots, high heels positioned perfectly, wine glass beside an unread book, and of course, sugar-sweet comments from friends in real estate. She often posted pictures of home tours in coastal Oregon. One of those properties had a white wooden villa, secluded and facing the bay, a place she called her dream at 35. Every time she passed by for work, she'd post a photo in front of the wooden gate, sunlight catching her hair, with a polished caption, "See you again someday soon." I read and saved every post, not out of jealousy, but because I wanted to understand what made her dream of that place so much. I began tracking the market trends in that region, studied zoning history, cross-checked it with news of a nearby resort project about to expand. Then one night, during a shift, sitting in the break room with a half-eaten sandwich, I got a message from a realtor I'd contacted 6 months prior. The Bayfront villa is back on the market. Owner needs to sell quickly. Great price. I stood up in the quiet of the night, stepped out into the hallway. The yellow lights glowed on the polished tiles. A few emergency patients were still on oxygen. I replied simply, "I'll take it. Send the paperwork first thing in the morning." 3 days later, I wired the deposit. 1 week after that, the bank approved an investment loan with a lower interest rate than I had expected. I didn't need to tell anyone. I just saved the confirmation email with the subject line, "Congratulations, Sophie. The home at 24 Maple Shore Drive is now yours." I stared at the attached photo. It was the exact house Savannah once stood in front of, wearing a white dress. That wooden gate was now open for me. No hashtags, no wide-angle lens, no flaunting. I didn't buy it to get back at her. I bought it because I saw potential. That home sat right at the heart of the new expansion zone for the upcoming resort project. If I kept it, the value would rise steadily. If I rented it out, the profits would cover the loan and still leave surplus. I followed what the podcast host said. Investing doesn't need to be fast, just the right timing and the right patience. Brian once joked at dinner, Savannah has great taste in houses, but she's not great with the math. I looked at him, tempted to ask, then who's making the real financial decisions behind her? But I stayed quiet. I already knew the answer. I kept living as I always had, showed up to work on time, wore my white scrubs, ate my chicken sandwich during shifts. But every time I opened my banking app, every time I saw the address of the vacation villa with my name on the deed, I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I had done something completely for myself. Not for praise, not to prove anything, but because I knew my worth wasn't in Savannah's dresses, in Mom's glances, or in Dad's silence. It was in every night I didn't sleep, every dollar I saved, every decision I made with no applause, no audience. And now, those very things were taking me to places no one thought I'd ever reach. While Savannah still stood outside her dream gate taking photos, I had already stepped inside. That evening, I arrived at Savannah's new home right on time. Not early, not late. Her newly renovated villa smelled faintly of cement, the patio tiles still fresh, warm yellow lights spilled from lanterns on the porch, and soft music played from hidden speakers behind the trees. I wore a simple blue dress, nothing flashy, but just polished enough. In my light brown leather handbag was a neatly clipped folder, a copy of the sales contract, a notarized confirmation, and a congratulatory letter from the real estate office. Everything was ready. I stepped into the foyer, where the soft lighting shone on framed photos carefully hung along the hallway. Wedding photos of Savannah and Brian, shots of her posing in front of model homes. One picture showed her standing in front of the Bayfront villa, the one with rows of pine trees and the sea glistening in the distance. Beneath the photo was a handwritten caption, "The dream is slowly becoming real." Brian greeted me first, his voice slightly awkward. "Sophie, you made it. Savannah's in the kitchen. She's, finishing up." "She's cooking?" I asked. He pressed his lips into a faint smile. Something like that?" As I passed the kitchen, through the crack in the door, I saw Mom unpacking food from takeout boxes, while Savannah was rearranging the trays like she'd cooked everything herself. The rich smell of wine sauce rose from a pot barely heating on the stove, but I knew it well. It was the signature beef bourguignon from the restaurant 3 blocks down. Savannah looked up when she saw me. Her face was perfectly made up, hair pinned into a high bun, her pearl-toned fitted dress shimmering under the lights. "Sophie, you're just in time." I gave her a soft smile. "You called this an intimate family dinner. I wouldn't dare show up late." She glanced quickly at the handbag I set on a chair, then turned away like it didn't matter. "Why don't you go on into the living room? Everyone's almost here." I walked in. Jeremy, my cousin, was pouring wine. When he saw me, he winked and leaned in. "She's about to announce something again. Another big news for the family." I smiled, gave a small nod, and sat down by the window. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I just wanted to observe, to feel this moment with full clarity. About 10 minutes later, Brian invited everyone to the dining table. The room buzzed with the scraping of chairs, clinking glasses, and the usual round of congratulations. Savannah stood, raising her glass, the crystal chandelier above casting dazzling reflections off her immaculate makeup. "Thank you all for coming. I know everyone's busy these days, so having you here means a lot to me." She paused, scanning the room, her gaze lingering a bit longer on me. I have some good news I want to share with the whole family. All eyes turned to Savannah. I slowly lifted my water glass and took a small sip. As you know, we've been pursuing a Bayfront property in Oregon for quite some time, and after negotiations, finally, we're about to sign. My dream is coming true. Scattered applause broke out. A few people quickly raised their glasses to toast, but just then, Brian frowned at his phone, then leaned over and whispered something to her. Savannah's face tightened. What? Brian spoke louder. I just got an email from the agent. The house has been sold. They're sorry they didn't honor the priority promise. The room fell silent. No, that can't be, Savannah stammered. I sent the letter of intent. I told them to hold it for me. You never signed anything, Brian said quietly. No deposit. They weren't obligated to wait. Savannah whipped around to face me. Sophie, do you know anything? You work in real estate. Was someone in the system messing with us? I set my glass down, calmly opened my handbag, and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. All eyes turned toward me. No one messed with you, I said. The person who bought the house was me. A spoon dropped onto a plate. Murmurs swelled, then died into silence. Savannah stood frozen. You, what? I held the folder out to her. Notarized paperwork, transfer complete. The house on Maple Shore is mine now. She snatched it, flipping through the pages quickly. The confidence that had once filled her face drained to pale disbelief. No way. You're a nurse. You work night shifts. How could you possibly afford this? I met her gaze, my voice steady. Yes, I work night shifts, but I also know how to invest, how to save, and how to set goals. While you were busy showing off your dream, I was making it a reality. My father stood slowly, his voice unsure. Sophie, you really own that house? I nodded. Yes. My name is on the deed. No one's holding it for me. No one's acting on my behalf. My mother looked at me as if she were seeing her daughter clearly. Savannah's hands were trembling, still clutching the folder but too afraid to read on. You did this to get back at me? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, this room where I'd once sat quietly for hundreds of family gatherings, where my voice was always smaller than hers. I did this, I said slowly, because I've grown too used to being underestimated. And I thought, it's time to show everyone that silence doesn't mean absence. Savannah slumped into a chair, eyes fixed on nothing. No one else spoke. The soft background music continued to play through the wide room, but no one was really listening anymore. I tucked the folder back into my bag, pulled out a chair, and sat down, pouring myself a glass of water. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I just needed them to see clearly that I was no longer the shadow in my own story, and the dream they once laughed off now had a different owner. 3 days after that dinner, I was changing clothes in the hospital's break room after a 14-hour shift when I received a message from Brian. I need to talk, alone, about Savannah. Urgent. We met at a small coffee shop across from the hospital. Brian had arrived early, sitting in a corner alone, tapping his fingers on a now cold cup. His shirt was wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept all week. I walked up, barely seated, when he slid a large envelope across the table. This is why I asked to see you. I opened it. Inside were bank statements, credit card debt records, and worst of all, 3 loan applications with Brian's signature that weren't signed by him. I looked up, bluntly. She forged your signature? Brian nodded, eyes reddening. I only realized it when the bank called to confirm a new loan. I thought it was a mistake, but when I looked at the signature, I knew it wasn't mine. I froze. The pain wasn't sharp, but it crawled steadily down my spine. It wasn't the money over $90,000 might be a large amount, but what truly stunned me was how Savannah had built an entire glamorous life on borrowing, forgery, and lies. What did she say? I asked. She denied it, then cried, then apologized, then blamed pressure, expectations, and the need to keep up appearances. Brian shook his head, his voice hoarse. She planned to use the Bayfront house as collateral to secure another loan and legitimize all the old debts. But when you bought that house, everything collapsed. Brian looked at me, his eyes heavy with sorrow. I'm sorry, Sophie, for what Savannah said, for how your family treated you, but I can't stay silent anymore. I folded the documents, gripping them tightly in my hand. Thank you for trusting me. The next day, Mom called. Her voice trembled with emotion. Sophie, we're having a family meeting this weekend, at the old house. Your father and I want to talk about how we can help Savannah. Will you come? I asked directly. What exactly do you want to do? Your father and I are thinking of taking out another bank loan, using the house as collateral, just to give her a chance to start over. I gripped the phone, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with restrained anger. You're going to gamble the house you've lived in for over 30 years just to cover for someone who forged her husband's signature? She's desperate, Sophie. She's lost her way, and there's no one else. I was desperate too, remember? Silence. I continued, my voice no longer gentle. When you were in the hospital, who dropped out of school to care for you? When I bought my first apartment, who in the family asked how I managed the mortgage? When I got promoted, who even mentioned it over dinner? I heard my mother sigh, then choke back a sound. Sophie, you don't understand. As a parent, you can't just watch your child fall apart in front of you. No one falls apart from being held accountable. People only spiral when they've never been asked to take responsibility. Saturday evening, I arrived at my parents' house. The house I grew up in looked exactly the same. Faded paint, stiff old sofa, the curtains sun-bleached but still washed and ironed by Mom. In the living room, nearly everyone was already seated. Savannah sat in the center, her makeup faint, hair loose and messy, no longer radiating the power of someone in control. Brian sat apart from her, arms crossed. Mom clutched a tissue, and Dad stood near the window, his back slightly hunched. The moment I stepped in, Savannah stood. Sophie, did you really have to come? Haven't you humiliated me enough? I didn't answer. I set the folder on the table and looked straight at Dad. You're planning to sign for a home equity loan, aren't you? Dad avoided my eyes. This is to help the family. No one wants to see their child drowning in debt. I opened the folder and pointed to the forged signature. You want to help someone who lied to her own husband and now wants to use the family's name to lie again? Savannah clenched her fists. You're blowing this out of proportion. I didn't mean harm. I just didn't have another option. I kept my voice calm. You did. You could have faced the consequences. You could have tried to fix what you broke instead of asking someone else to tape the pieces together for you. What do you want? She nearly shouted. Do you want the whole family to hate me? Do you want Mom and Dad to choose between us? I met her eyes, unflinching. No, I want you to finally look at yourself, for once in your life. Savannah stepped back, her eyes reddening. You just want to tear this family apart out of jealousy, don't you? I let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, but the kind that came from a sorrow too deep for words. There's nothing to envy about a facade. I'm not the one breaking anything. You did that when you traded trust for credit cards, when you swapped family for image. The room went silent. I looked around, Mom crying quietly, Dad sitting down, his hands shaking. Brian closed his eyes like he was praying. I stood up, gathered the folder, and said clearly but softly, "If you go through with the mortgage, I will withdraw all of my financial share. I will not enable someone who doesn't know when to stop." I walked toward the door. Behind me, Savannah called out, "You'll regret this. You'll have to live knowing you abandoned your own family." I didn't turn back. Because I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was refusing to rescue someone who was dragging everyone else down while insisting she was the victim. That afternoon, the sky over the Oregon Bay had softened after a light drizzle. Droplets still clung to the wooden porch steps, catching the late sun like shards of broken glass. I opened the doors of the villa wide, letting the scent of pine and citrus from the diffuser drift gently into the room. Everything was ready, a long table draped in white, files arranged neatly in front of each seat, hot tea, cookies, and a bouquet of hydrangeas in the center. I had handwritten each invitation to my family not by email, not by text. Each letter ended with the same line in italics: "Come not to receive, but to build together." Mom arrived first, wearing a soft gray sweater and carrying a small box of cookies. I took it from her, placed it on the table, and invited her to sit. Dad came in next, walking alongside Jeremy. Savannah and Brian were the last to arrive, as usual. But Savannah didn't glow with confidence. She wore a simple white blouse, her hair tied back, no makeup, eyes slightly puffy. She said nothing as she entered, barely nodding at me before sitting quietly. Once everyone was settled, I stood. "Thank you all for coming today. I know it's not easy to sit together after everything that's happened, but this isn't a fight. This isn't about blame. It's about a new beginning if we're ready." Mom looked at me, a mix of worry and hope in her eyes. I nodded gently and opened the folder in front of me. "I've decided to transfer the ownership of this villa into a family trust. It will have legal status, clear terms, and every person in this room, including myself, will be a member." A murmur swept across the room. My father furrowed his brow and asked, "A family trust? What does that mean exactly?" "It means the house will no longer be under an individual's name. No one will be allowed to sell, mortgage, or borrow against it. This will be a shared space, but not one anyone can use however they want." Savannah exhaled, her voice dry. "So, none of us will own it anymore?" "Not in the old sense," I said. "But we can all use it, preserve it, if we fulfill our responsibilities. I've hired lawyers and financial advisors. Everything is outlined clearly in the charter." I handed out a folder to each person. Inside, 3 key terms were highlighted. The property cannot be used as collateral for any personal loans. Any family member who wishes to use the vacation house must have transparent finances. No overdue credit debt, no records of illegal borrowing. Everyone must complete a 3-month personal financial counseling program fully funded by the family trust. The living room fell silent. Everyone lowered their heads to read, but their eyes slowly drifted back toward me. Mom was the first to speak. "Sophie, are you doing this because of your sister?" "Not just because of her, but because for all these years, we've been living in a deeply unfair system. I don't want anyone to keep being cast as the one who puts up with it or the one who bails everyone out. This house will be a shared space, but not a place to plug anyone's financial holes." Suddenly, Savannah stood up, clutching the folder tightly in her hands. "I don't deserve this," she said, her voice choking. "No one knows that more than I do. I've shattered the trust of the person beside me. I've been lying to myself for years. I have no right to enter this house. I'm not worthy." She let the folder fall onto the chair and covered her face with both hands. All eyes turned to me. I stood still for a moment, then walked over, picked up the folder, and placed it back on the table. None of us were worthy to begin with, I said slowly. But anyone can learn how to grow up. I didn't create this trust to push people out. I created it to give everyone a fair chance to come in the right way. Savannah looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something different in her gaze now. No more bitterness, just exhaustion and a flicker of hope she didn't quite dare to believe in. Brian gently touched her shoulder. "If you're willing," he said, "we can start over, together." I looked around the room. My father was carefully reading through the terms again. Jeremy nodded, jotting something in the margin. My mom held her cup of tea, eyes still wet, but her hands had stopped trembling. "That financial recovery course," Savannah asked quietly, "who teaches it?" "It's run by an independent organization not connected to me," I said. "They have a set schedule. It starts next month. You can register now. Each person only has to attend once, and after that, you'll be granted rotating access to the house every year." Savannah gave a small nod. Brian gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, then turned to me. "Thank you. Not just for the house." I didn't reply. I just returned to the table, poured more tea, and looked out at the bay. The sea was calm, the sky washed in a soft orange tint from the setting sun. Some things can't be fixed overnight. But when people are willing to sit down, open up, and set healthy boundaries, sometimes healing can begin right there. One week after the family meeting at the villa, I received a call from Sarah, the representative of the Coastal Resort Development Company. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying the polished tone of someone who'd closed hundreds of high-stakes real estate deals. "Sophie, I'd like to meet in person. The board has unanimously agreed to raise our offer to 3 times the current market value of the villa." I heard every word. A part of me couldn't deny how tempting that number was. With that money, I could retire, buy more properties, invest long-term, or simply live comfortably for the rest of my life. But I also knew the true value of this house wasn't in the wooden walls or oceanfront lawn. We met in the lounge of a small hotel near the bay. Sarah brought a folder neatly tucked inside a black leather portfolio. "We see your villa as the final piece to complete our luxury resort line along the bay. If you agree to sell, we can finalize all the paperwork in under a month." I stayed silent for a moment, then asked, "What if I don't sell?" Sarah looked at me, unfazed. "We'll continue building the rest of the development around it, but any inconsistency in the layout could cause setbacks, and it's unlikely we'll find another location as ideal." I nodded, not arguing. "Then what if I don't sell but propose a partnership instead?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A partnership? I propose this. Your company develops the infrastructure, manages operations, but the villa remains owned by my family trust. You can build around it. We'll even allow the villa to be used in promotional materials as a brand symbol, but no one gets ownership or control over it." Sarah straightened up in her seat, clearly interested. "You want to retain decision-making power?" "Not for myself. The family trust will retain it, and I only have one condition. None of us will be allowed to vote or receive profit shares unless we've completed the full personal finance program. Financial stability is the foundation. If someone hasn't built that, they shouldn't be touching anything meant to last." Sarah stayed quiet for a beat, then she smiled. "I'll present this proposal to the board, but I have to say, this is one of the most unique offers I've ever received." "I didn't set out to be unique," I replied. "I just want to protect something sustainable without sacrificing principle." 2 days later, Sarah's response email came just before midnight. They agreed to the partnership. No buyout, no takeover, just infrastructure development and profit sharing based on the terms we agreed upon. My family's villa would become the centerpiece of the resort chain, but no one would ever be allowed to mortgage or sell it during a moment of weakness. The next morning, I printed all the documents and placed them into a blue binder. In my mind were images of my family gathered in that villa. Mom pouring tea, Dad adjusting a chair, Jeremy running around with a camera capturing every moment. I imagined Savannah sitting on the porch, her hair loose, no longer hiding behind mascara or camera flashes. I imagined a family no longer dodging, no longer blaming, just learning to take responsibility and walk forward together. 3 days later, I hosted a small meeting not to announce, but to seek approval. Everyone gathered again in that familiar living room. My parents sat next to each other, their eyes less guarded now. Jeremy brought his laptop and typed like a true facilitator. Savannah was quieter, her face thinner, but with a new kind of clarity. I stood and handed each person a summary of the partnership project. The tourism company approved the plan to let our family retain ownership. We'll receive a regular share of the revenue from the surrounding tourism development. But no one will be allowed to vote on any decisions unless they've completed the personal financial counseling program and submitted verified documentation proving financial transparency. My father cleared his throat. So you mean if someone still has credit card debt or took out unsecured loans and didn't disclose them, they won't be eligible for any benefits? I nodded. That's right. Savannah spoke slowly. And if someone already violated that, like me, what then? I didn't look away. You can start over. Begin with the first counseling session. Once the program is completed and your finances are verified, you'll have the same rights as everyone else. Savannah bowed her head. I agree, no matter how long it takes. My father turned to my mother, then gave a small nod. Your mother and I, we agree too. I looked around the room. Jeremy raised his hand and smiled. I agree, too. But I think there should be an independent person overseeing the entire process. Good, I replied. You'll be that person. There were no claps, no cheering, but that quiet agreement meant more to me than all the fake applause at the parties Savannah used to host. We weren't discussing who had more money, who was more successful, or who deserved more recognition. We were talking about how to preserve something meaningful without losing ourselves in the process. And to me, that was the true beginning of a real family. Savannah moved back into our parents' house just 3 weeks after the meeting at the villa. Her white SUV was gone. Instead, an old borrowed car, loaned by one of my father's old friends from the neighboring town, now sat in the driveway. My mother spent an entire afternoon cleaning the room that used to be mine, now the room Savannah would temporarily stay in while figuring out her next steps. She didn't say much. At first, she stayed mostly in the kitchen, making her own tea, doing her own laundry, avoiding everyone's gaze. One time, when I dropped by to bring Mom some vitamins, I saw Savannah folding a tablecloth that Mom used to handle herself. I was about to quietly step away, but she called out, Sophie! I turned back. She didn't look at me right away. She gently placed the tablecloth on the table. Her voice was low, hesitant. Thank you for not cutting me off. I stepped inside, leaning against the wooden chair nearby. You don't have to thank me for something that should have been normal. Savannah gave a small nod. Her eyes were red, but no tears came. Maybe because the night she spent crying alone had already emptied her out. After that day, she began the financial counseling program as required by the family fund. I received regular reports from the center. Savannah never missed a session, showed up on time, completed every assignment. Occasionally, she even emailed additional questions to the experts, asking in detail about spending habits, how to set up a budget with a regular income, and how to rebuild a damaged credit profile from scratch. Jeremy, whom I appointed as the monitoring secretary for the program, met with me one Friday afternoon. "She's really trying," Jeremy said as we sat across from each other in a cafe near the hospital. I didn't think Savannah would take it seriously, but maybe she's hit rock bottom. I didn't respond right away. My mind drifted back to those dinners when Savannah always sat in the center, her voice drowning out everyone else's, while I quietly ate in the corner, trying not to be noticed. Now, it felt like the world had flipped, but not to reverse roles. This time, it was so we could both step out of the family drama someone else had scripted for us. About a month later, while I was reviewing documents for the fund, I heard the doorbell. It was drizzling. I stepped onto the porch and saw Savannah, standing there, wearing a raincoat, holding a thick, leather-bound notebook. "I didn't want to call ahead," she said softly but clearly. "I was afraid you'd say no." I invited her inside. The living room was the same, simple, tidy, with the wool rug I bought at a craft fair years ago. Savannah sat down on the couch, placing the notebook on the coffee table between us. "This is the personal finance journal I've been keeping for the past 2 months," she said. "They encouraged us to write by hand to understand what we spend, why we spend it, and what emotions are tied to each decision." At first it felt silly, but now I flipped through a few pages. Her familiar handwriting was neat, listing each expense: coffee, gas, phone bills, a little grocery money sent to Mom. There were even blue-inked notes in the margins. "Wanted to order takeout today, but remembered last month's overdraft, so I cooked at home." Or "Didn't buy those discounted shoes because I didn't really need them." "And I don't have anyone to impress anymore." Savannah pulled a folded sheet from her jacket pocket and placed it next to the notebook. "This is the official confirmation that I completed the program. They said I now qualify for benefits from the fund, but I didn't come here to ask for my share." I looked up. Her eyes at that moment were unlike any version of her I had seen before. No makeup, no defensiveness, no pride, just exhaustion and a determination that only those who've truly hit bottom can show. "I came here because you were the first person to look straight at my lies and still not walk away. Thank you for not letting me keep pretending." I placed my hand on the notebook, gently. "You don't have to pretend anymore. No one should live up to a version of themselves that's killing them inside." Savannah nodded. There were no tears, no justifications. Just one honest moment between two women who had once been rivals in the same family, but now could face each other without masks. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and retrieved a new folder. The renovation plans to turn the villa's backyard into a shared community space, complete with a budget, draft layouts, and task assignments. I handed her a copy. "If you want to start again, this is one part of the project you can help with. Not for the fund, for yourself." She opened the folder, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm not good with logistics. You can see the big picture. You know how to present ideas. You know how to map out a plan. You used to work in marketing, didn't you?" Savannah looked at me, and I saw a genuine smile. "Yeah, but I'll do it without adding shadows to the light." I didn't say anything. I just felt something lift inside me. Not because she had changed, but because finally I could see her for who she truly was, no longer through the fog of past resentments, pain, or competition. She's not perfect, but at least now she's being real. And for me, that's enough to begin again. That afternoon, a light breeze came from the bay, carrying the salty scent of sea air and the endless murmur of waves crashing against the base of the hill. On the wooden deck of the villa, I laid out a white tablecloth, placed small lavender pots between clusters of chairs, neatly arranged folders, and small wooden pens engraved with each person's name. Behind the deck sat a table with tea and almond cookies, my mother's favorite, and inside the kitchen, Jeremy was setting out juice and a pot of hot coffee. I didn't call this a party. It was the very first official meeting of the family fund, a gathering where everyone had a voice and everyone held responsibility. The first to arrive was Mom. She wore a cream cardigan with an old brooch I'd given her back in high school. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her heartbeat steady and calmer than the tense days before. "You really thought of everything," she said, looking around, like a professional housekeeper. I smiled and led her out to the deck. I like things to be clear and just warm enough that people want to come back. Dad arrived next, accompanied by a distant cousin from Seattle, the same one who had contributed to the fund as soon as I announced the long-term development plan. Jeremy waved from across the yard, and Brian helped me bring out a few more chairs. Not long after, Savannah's old car pulled up at the top of the driveway. She stepped out first, her hair tied high, wearing a pale gray linen dress and a pair of flats worn down at the heel. Brian followed behind, carrying a small box. When Savannah stepped onto the deck, everything seemed to pause for a beat. No one clapped, no one offered praise, but no one turned away either. And that silence, to me, was the greatest form of acknowledgement. "Hello, everyone," Savannah said softly with a slight bow. "Thank you for letting me be here." I invited her to sit in the chair to my right, the one usually reserved for the first speaker. The meeting started simply. I reviewed the progress on the house repairs, updated everyone on the partnership with the tourism company, then went around inviting each person to share their thoughts after the fund's first 3 months. Mom spoke briefly. I didn't think I was too old to learn something new, but I guess I needed someone to remind me of that. Dad had more to say, recalling the old summers, the times he painted the fence alone while we argued in the kitchen. I used to think staying silent kept the family peaceful, but Sophie showed me that sometimes you have to speak up for people to really listen. When it was Savannah's turn, the deck fell silent again. She sat up straight, hands gently holding the chair's armrest, eyes scanning everyone before settling on me. I used to think I had everything, and I tried to keep up that image at all costs. I pushed others down to feel taller, but in the end, I was the one who fell the hardest. And if it weren't for Sophie, I don't think I would have stopped, she inhaled, keeping her voice steady. The financial counseling program didn't just teach me about money, it helped me face myself. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I'm here to say, if Sophie still wants me here, I'm ready to do my part. No one said anything immediately, but Jeremy nodded gently. Mom reached out and touched her hand. And me, I didn't smile, I just nodded. She understood what that meant. I stood up and pulled out another set of documents. "There's one more thing I want to announce today," I said, voice soft but clear. "A portion of the profit from our tourism partnership will go into a new branch of the fund, the Clara Evans Scholarship." Mom looked up, surprised. I turned to her. "This fund will be for family members and future generations who want to pursue careers in medicine, nursing, or other healthcare fields. It's a way for your quiet sacrifices to become an inspiration for those who come after." Mom raised a hand to her mouth, eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do this." "I didn't do it to make you happy," I replied. "I did it for those nights you sat in hospital hallways waiting for my shift to end. For those times you silently washed dishes while the family criticized me for choosing a futureless career. I want your voice to live on through action." The whole family sat in silence. But the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like a deep, shared understanding, no words needed. When the meeting ended, no one rushed to leave. They stayed behind to chat, sip tea, and review documents. Savannah walked with Mom to the backyard while Jeremy sat beside me, folder in hand, speaking softly. You know, I used to think you lived quietly because you were afraid of conflict. Now I realize, not everyone who walks slowly is weak. Sometimes they're the ones leading the way. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him and smiled. The air was growing cooler. String lights hanging along the roofline lit up slowly, casting a soft golden glow on each face. I stood still, watching everyone connect, not with applause or loud laughter, but with patient listening and the quiet respect of walking alongside one another. I'm not looking for admiration. I just need them to stop looking down on me. And today, that finally happened. My story may have closed a chapter here, but for every family and every person, the journey of growing up and learning how to truly understand one another is never a short road. I stayed silent for years, not because I was weak, but because I was waiting for the right moment to speak with action. What about you? In your own family, have you ever felt overlooked despite giving it your all? Do you believe that sometimes a firm silence is the strongest way to challenge an old, harmful way of thinking? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes telling your story can be the first step in helping someone out there feel a little less alone. And if this story touched something deep within you, don't forget to follow the channel. There are more stories ahead, real stories about hurt, forgiveness, and how each of us, in our own way, can relearn how to love our families one moment at a time.